When you need the right answers to the problem, you always seek out a professional to get help.
You are Locked On Trojans, your daily podcast on the USC Trojans, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Fight on, everyone. I'm your host, Mark Holkin, and thank you for making Locked On USC part of the Locked On Network your first listen every day. Whether you're watching the show on YouTube, wherever you're going to download this thing's always going to be free, and you know I'm always going to appreciate your support. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet, and you're going to get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Today, I need help. I need professional help. I've had him on the show before, and believe it or not, he still wanted to come back. So maybe it's him who needs professional help. Nevertheless, welcome back to the show. From Pro Football Focus, his name is Dalton Wasserman, analyst, contributor, co-host of PFF's college football show. Dalton, thanks, man. It's been a few months, but glad you're back.
Oh, yeah, no problem. Listen, Mark, we always need professional help at some point, every single one of us, right? And sometimes you just got to get through those hard times. And I know the Trojans are going through it a little bit, but you know they're not that far off. I know it's tough with the record and the way it is in these close games, but they're not that far off. So it just takes a little bit here and there to get it going and get back on track.
You sounded a little bit like Lincoln Riley there with "we're not that far away, just one play here," but I'm not going to hold you to that. Back in August when you came on the show, this was right before USC was taking on LSU, I asked you if Miller Moss could help USC's offensive EPA improve. And you were pretty positive about that back then. So what's happened since USC beat LSU, as well as Utah State at home? What's happened since then?
I think it's been like something a little bit different every game, right? Against Michigan, it was the pass protection, and that's a really good defensive line. Or it just feels like USC is in that spot. I know, again, it's painful to lose all these close games, but it's been just like a little thing here and a little bit there. Like, again, against Maryland, it's a blocked field goal, right? Against Penn State, it's a little bit of coverage issues, and they slowed down in the second half. It's just they're having this problem right now where every game it's just something just a little bit different, right? They're not executing at like a poor level for an entire game. It's just that they're not finishing these games, and it's just been a little bit of something every time late in these games that's been a problem for them. So, the one thing I will say that to me is consistent throughout some of these problems is too many turnovers. And I think that's an issue. You can't have as many turnovers as you've had in these, especially when you have close, tight-knit games, right, against teams like Michigan and Minnesota, Penn State when you're ahead. You just can't have turnovers. And Miller Moss has been a little more risky with the football, especially with his offensive line kind of struggling, and even the receivers kind of struggling to get open a little bit. So it just feels like USC is one of those teams right now in big moments. It's not always the same thing over and over, but there's just something is off, right? It just kind of feels like, something goes wrong, and they're just missing the mark by just a little bit.
Right. I mean, we could use this last game as an example. USC's up 21-7 versus Maryland. They're driving. All of a sudden, you throw the interception. Guy runs it back 60-plus yards. Next play, all of a sudden now it's 21-14. So instead of maybe being 24-7, 28-7, it's the timing of the turnovers. And like you said, he's been a little loosey-goosey with his decision-making as far as throwing the ball. The wide receivers haven't been as good as we had hoped for. And you touched on the offensive line. So, you also talked about the Penn State game, and this is what you wrote before that game. USC's front five has struggled mightily this year. Among the Power 4 offensive lines, the Trojans have the third worst overall grade, 56.4. USC also owns the second worst pass blocking grade, the fifth worst run blocking grade in the Power 4 conferences. And what's ironic to me, though, is with all of that, I think their offensive line played maybe their best game against Penn State as far as keeping Penn State's defensive line from doing what they wanted to do. So is Lincoln Riley coaching to USC's offensive strength, considering that their pass protection is so bad? Why are they throwing it so many times?
Yeah, I think so. I really do think so. And like say in that game specifically, I do think they struggled to run block. I think what he did a really good job of, especially in the first half of that game, was getting the ball to his athletes in space. I thought they really had they did a good job of giving Penn State issues in space and making Penn State chase their athletes right out, like out on the edge and out on screens, and even in the run a little bit when he got them spread out. But they're not generally a team that's just going to light up and out physical teams, right? And especially with the way their offensive line has been playing. But I thought Penn State made some really good adjustments later in the game to like, okay, they're going to be more prepared to play in space and do those things. And their linebackers had a little bit better time in the second half. But I thought, it's just this thing where it's like, it feels like even the play calling, it's great for certain stretches of games. And then you get into the second half like that Penn State game, and then it kind of slows down a little bit, right? I thought they came in with a really good plan, right? You went up 20-6 at half. I thought Lincoln came in with a fantastic game plan that first half. Get your athletes in space and make this big Big Ten team play in space and tackle in space. And Penn State really had an issue with it, but eventually they made adjustments, and the adjustment back just wasn't quite made in that game, especially when you're talking about you're ahead and you want to run the ball and you want to kill the clock. It just didn't happen, right? And Drew Aller obviously made big plays for Penn State in big moments too. It just felt like they were that close, and it just feels like in the biggest moments right now, USC, they're getting it done for the most part, but in the biggest moments of games, they're just missing the mark. And it's hard. It really is hard to evaluate a team like that and to watch a team like that, because they're so close. I thought they played for two quarters, even 3 quarters in that game. I thought they played a really good game, but Penn State made adjustments and USC didn't adjust back.
Yeah, and that, which I guess is a perfect segue to this question in this segment. I asked you, is he coaching to the team's offensive strengths? My biggest pet peeve with Coach Riley right now is his clock management, or the lack thereof. When you have the lead, the clock is your friend, and you have leads in the fourth quarter of every single game. At this point, what's the answer? Why is he hesitant to run the ball earlier in the game to keep draining that clock, so you're not running into these moments at the end of the game where you're hanging on like, all right, I'm going to coach not to lose, but that prevent offense is causing you to lose.
I really think it's a thing where, again, it's the offensive line to me. And I think they're just not the type of team that can line up and get 5-6 yards every carry and milk the clock and do that, right? They're not the most physical team in the country. We've seen them in the games that they've won with Miller Moss and their receivers when their receivers are getting it right. But it's not been great on the offensive line this year. I think we thought the move to Jonah Monheim at center would really be working, and that's not really working great. I mean, it's just the entire thing. They're not physical enough to kill the clock like that, right? So they have to keep relying on Miller Moss even late in games when they're ahead, and it's just you're seeing the execution late in games when they're just not one of these teams, say like in Ohio State, that can just line up and run the football and get 6-7 yards and milk the clock like that, right? It's hard. It can be hard when you have a team like that that's really more of a finesse team to, like you mentioned, when you're ahead, to make those things happen. So I think, again, it comes down to very little things. I think it's funny because I've been saying USC, they're probably the best 3-3 or 3-4 team in the country, but it doesn't make you feel any better, right? When you think about trying to finish these games in the last 5 minutes and finish teams off, it's just they've only been a little bit off. It's not like they're particularly bad at anything, but if I had to point at one thing, is their offensive line. And I think it's just a level of physicality that doesn't happen for 60 minutes every single week.
Well, you're not going to get any argument from me that the offensive line is the Achilles heel on that side of the ball. But they're averaging almost 5 yards per carry when they run the ball. I'm going to plant this flag until I die. I think Coach Riley should have went for it on 4th and 1 at Maryland, because it's not, even if you don't convert, at least you're sending a message to your team. We're going to go win the game this way. We're not going to rely on, oh yeah, we can, go up 9 points, but I would rather end the game in victory formation. And it's, again, I just don't think he's coaching to the team's best abilities at the right time. And that guy knows more offense than I will ever know. But it just seems like every decision it's always the wrong decision. At least the outcome ends up being the wrong decision. So on that note, I'll drop it. A lot of the USC fans are like, dude, Mark, he made the right analytical choice. He should have kicked the field goal. Well, you missed one earlier in the game, and you're relying on a 41-yard field goal, which isn't an automatic. When you can just say, you know what, guys, I need 1 yard right now, and the game's over. That's what I don't know. That's just me.
No, it is tough. I mean, and those are tough decisions when you talk about with the game on the line. I will say, I mean, because what was it? They were up by 6 when that decision was made. I mean, there's also the part where, well, the field goal team has got to protect too. So it's like it got blocked in that game. It's not like the kid missed the kick; he got blocked. So it really is. There's a lot that goes into it. But I mean, I could absolutely see it either way when you talk about an offense and a quarterback that you trust, and then a field goal that gets blocked. It is unfortunate. And even then, after that, you're still up 6, and Maryland doesn't have a whole lot of time to work with. You still have an opportunity to make a stop. It feels like they're that team right now that just nothing is going right in the biggest moments. And that is tough. That's really tough to watch. It's really tough to go through because they could very easily have a much better record than they have right now.
Right. And you just touched on, they could have made a stop. We're going to talk about that side of the ball coming up next. It's NFL season, and I know Dalton's a big NFL fan. I don't know if he started the season with a big return yet, but if he's using FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, he might have. So, when you're watching a bunch of games and you're focused on one, but you want to catch up on the live play-by-plays and the stats, well, you can do that at FanDuel. It's not just the place where you're going to place your bets. And if you've never used FanDuel before, here's your chance. You're going to get started with $200 in bonus bets, guaranteed. All you have to do, place a $5 bet. That's it. Place $5. Even win or lose, you get $200 in bonus bets, guaranteed. That's FanDuel.com. All right, so Dalton, I think we all remember how crappy USC's defense was last year. I mean, it was beyond bad. And they couldn't stop anything. Now, this year, the pass defense, it's fading a little bit down the stretch. I think a lot of that has to do with attrition. They're only giving up 223 yards per game. You're saying, yeah, well, Mark, it's a big conference. They don't throw the ball particularly well in that conference. And their rushing defense only gives up 138 per contest. And they're only giving up 22 points per game. Help me out here. Why is USC 3-4? They're giving up 22 points a game, and the offense cannot score enough to win games.
I think it really is. It's one of those things where the analytics look. Here's the first thing I'll say. Their defense is absolutely better than it was last year. It is. I think Coach Lynn has gone in there and coached them to be at least very much more fundamentally sound. They are certainly more talented in the secondary, right? With guys like Kamari Ramsey and Greedy Vance and guys like that on the back end. They're definitely more talented. They're definitely coached better. They're absolutely better. Again, I just think it comes down, like even our analytics, okay, our grading has them as like a roughly average defense, okay? And obviously, like you mentioned, some good numbers there. They're playing relatively well, and you can see it on the field where they're playing much better. Like last year, I could sit here and tell you they couldn't stop the run, they couldn't tackle, they couldn't do anything. I think their defense is playing a relatively sound game just about every week. It's just, again, in big moments. It's just in those games when you have such a small margin for error that it's just those little moments, right? Like for the majority of the game, they are playing well, right? And it's just tough when you get to those big moments and maybe they make that one mistake. And it's the same way as the offense where it's like that one turnover or that one error that costs you a close game. It's tough with this defense because I really do think they've been playing well for the most part this year. But in just the biggest moments, they've come up just a little bit short. And it's hard. It's hard because you look at them snap to snap and you go, man, they're playing pretty good. It's so much better than it was last year because their defense was hopeless last year. And this year it's pretty good, but it's just those tiny little things that they have to learn. It's almost like this year they're just struggling. It's not like they're playing bad. They're just struggling to win ball games and finish them off in that last 5 minutes. It's tough. I really feel like you guys are in a tough spot because they have played well. They have certainly on defense played better than last year, and they're this close to winning all these games.
And I don't know. I don't know about you, but for a lot of us, I can go back to 2001, Pete Carroll's first year at USC. They finished the year 6-6, and they kept losing every game by this much. It was always a score, one score or less. But even in those losses, you can say, you know what? The team's getting better. I can see them developing. I don't get that sense right now. Again, they're this close. The margin for error is, you can't even fit it between my thumb and forefinger. Why is the team imploding at the worst times? It's like they find new ways each week to lose a game. Last week against Maryland, the guy comes through the offensive line like hot knife through butter to block the kick. At Michigan, bad officiating. When the big conference literally says, yeah, we didn't follow the rules, the official had a hunch that they scored the touchdown. Even though USC, they've actually had really good goal line stands. They play great against 4th and short. But at the end of the game now, all of a sudden, as the season wears on, is this attrition? Is it because they don't have enough players? I mean, Bear Alexander quit. Eric Gentry, Anthony Lucas, they're out for the season with injuries. Does this team just not believe that they can win these types of games? And if that's the case, is it a coaching issue?
It's always, this is always the hardest question, because those clutch situations are the ones that we have the hardest time even quantifying, right? Because generally what our numbers tell you is what's happening over the full 60 minutes. And what it would tell you is they're playing pretty well. But again, the margin for error in some of these tight games can be so small. And I think it does come down to, and I think we saw it even with Caleb Williams last year when they went 7-5, and there were some close games. I remember even in the Utah game where you just go, a team in situational football just has to know how to win. Right. And maybe it is a coaching thing. Maybe it is a culture thing where it's just like, we have to buckle down and make just one more play to win these games, because they have played, to me, when I watch them, they have played so much better than a 3-4 football team. Right. And it comes down to those moments where one more play needs to be made. Right. And our numbers will tell you things that they're doing across the entire game. And they've been pretty darn good. They've been better than what a 3-4 football team should look like. But it does matter. Those big situations do matter. And it's one of the things that sometimes it's hard to quantify, is those clutch moments, right? And those situational moments, because we treat them all the same, right? A football play is a football play, but to come through in this situation in a 1-score game, and right now they're just not quite doing it. And I really, again, I can't sit here and say they're a bad football team. They're not. They could easily be 5-2 or 6-1 or even 7-0, and they're just coming up one play short. So do I think, is there an element to it that could be coaching? Absolutely. There could be. And we've seen this from USC the last couple of years, right? It's kind of why they didn't win a conference title in either of the years that they had Caleb Williams even. And last year going 7-5 really wasn't an excuse to go 7-5 last year, and they could do the same thing this year, but they just have to come through in big moments. And it's hard. It's almost hard for the analytics to kind of quantify that, because you go, man, they're really good, but they're still finding ways to lose in these close games. It is tough. Defensively especially, I've been impressed with the way their defense has played all year. I'll be honest with you.
Me too.
I think even in their losses, I'm like, you can see it. You can see it on the field. Their defense is so much better than it was last year. It's just that one moment at the end of games where they need to find that one more punch to win the ball game.
Yeah. And I know sometimes it comes across that I'm not a big Lincoln Riley fan. That's not true. I'm a huge Lincoln Riley fan. I love the staff he's put together. But for whatever reason, like you said, it's not working the way it should be. You've got the offensive guru, and we've always said if he just had a defense, well, now he has a defense, and the offense is ironically the part that's not pulling their own weight, so to speak. So it's just been really tough to digest, figure out what's going on. Like you said, the analytics are there. They are playing enough defense to get the job done. They're not, in my opinion, they're not playing enough offense, obviously, to get the job done. Sometimes it just comes down to bad luck. I guess that's where we have to point to the intangible right now. But I do think they could use some more Jimmies and Joes. For me, the oddest part about this defense is well as they performed, you can't get a sack out of the defensive line. I mean, to me, that's just bizarre. Does Dalton Lynn have to blitz more? Because when they do, they've been pretty successful. But typically, he just sends 4 guys, and they get close, but they never finish.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things, too. I think when we looked at them in what they did in the transfer portal in the offseason, they added a lot more to the back 7 than they did the front 4. And there's sometimes Antonlynn you could see at USC, and he even does it now. There's some of that 5-man rush that he brings, but they're definitely missing that one primetime pass rusher, right? When you talk about a guy like Anthony Lucas leads the team with only 12 pressures and doesn't have a sack this year, that's the one part that even concerned me even before the season is like, okay, they added a lot in the back 7, right, at linebacker, at safety, at cornerback, but there wasn't a whole lot on the defensive line. There was a few decent guys they added, but there wasn't a primetime guy that they added in the pass rush. I do think you're absolutely right. That's the biggest weakness on this defense. They're certainly better. They're better tackling. They're better in coverage. They're better at rallying to the football. You can see the effort level is better. But at some point, you need those guys up front, especially for a guy like Lynn, who he does send 4 a lot. Sometimes he sends 5 a lot and kind of sets it up, as you know, the 5 guys that are going, kind of what he did at UCLA. But there's not a lot of exotic to it. They really want to play fundamentally sound football. But when you do that, you do need 1 or 2 of those guys as pass rushers. And at UCLA, he had 3 of them between Leatu Latu and the 2 Murphy brothers. He had 3 of them there. There's sometimes he could even send 3 down there and he would still get a pass rush. But USC, that you're right. You're absolutely right. You can feel that they're missing that one elite pass rusher that just bothers quarterbacks. And I think that is the biggest problem with this defense is they don't disrupt quarterbacks' rhythm enough. They got so much better in the back 7. I have to give them credit for the way they've played, the way they've tackled, the way they've played with more effort than last year. But that is missing, is that element of disrupting quarterbacks, throwing them off their rhythm. And I think you saw it, especially to me, you saw it in that Penn State game in big moments where they just couldn't quite get to Drew Aller to disturb him, and he ended up making big throws on him.
Okay, we're not going to talk about that game anymore because, Drew made some really nice plays at the right moments. But for the life of me, I still can't understand how number 44 ended up with more receiving yards, 224 yards, Tim Moss throwing for 220 yards. That was – all right, I'm going to go off on a rant. I don't want to go off on a rant right now. So we got one more segment coming up. Let's do this first, though. PrizePicks is the best place to get real money on sports action. With over 10 million members and billions, that's with a B, of dollars awarded in winnings, PrizePicks has made daily fantasy sports accessible to all. You pick more or less on at least 2 players, and you have a shot up to 100 times your cash. Run your game all season long on PrizePicks. PrizePicks, check this out. It's the best way to get action on sports in over 30 states, including those of you who live in California, Florida, Georgia, and Texas. You know what I'm talking about. Sometimes you can't even place a bet in those states. Now you too can win up to 100 times your money on PrizePicks with as little as 4 correct picks. PrizePicks is the only real money daily fantasy platform with an injury insurance policy, so your lineup stays in play, even if one of your players gets injured. If your player leaves in the first half and he doesn't return, PrizePicks keeps your lineup live. PrizePicks puts your members first, so with all withdrawals are fast, safe, and secure. When your picks hit, you get your money back within 15 minutes or so. So sign up today and get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to need to win to receive that $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. Download the app today. Use code LOCKEDONCollege to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Sign up today and get $50 instantly when you play $5. PrizePicks, run your game. All right, Dalton, tell me something. Your outlook. Professional, help me out. I'm on the couch right now. You're going to tell me, Mark, everything's going to be okay. What's the rest of the season look like? Is the future bright?
I think it can be. Look, and I know already with 4 losses and you don't have the playoff hope and you're still looking for some positives out of the rest of the season. But I think you're playing a game right now where I think you're going to get a lot of competitive games for the rest of the season, right? Starting with, with a Rutgers and a Washington and Nebraska. I think all of these games for USC are roughly even games that if you execute down the stretch in these games, you can win all of them, right? I think there's still a chance, even with a Notre Dame game at the end, that you could go from 3-4 to 8-4. Honestly, they just have to execute at the end of these games. And one-score games, you're 1-4 in one-score games right now. That can be noisy, right? Like there's a lot of times they talk about these close games that can come down to just one or two plays. That can be noisy, and that can swing back. The regression can swing back towards your way late in the season. Now, when you talk about, okay, they executed in the fourth quarter against the Rutgers, against a Washington, against a Nebraska, against a Notre Dame. So I think absolutely you can end this season on a really positive note, because I really do. I think USC's got a good football team. I think their team is better than 3-4. I think offensively with Miller Moss running the show, I think they're better than that. And I do think their defense is better than that. Are there flaws? Yes. Is the pass rush a flaw like we talked about? Absolutely. But they have played better defense than they did last year. And I believe in Miller Moss. I think he's one of the better quarterbacks in the country. I think it just comes down to executing in those clutch moments. They could absolutely win any or even all of these last 5 games. They're going to be in close games though. Rutgers is a physical team. Washington's a physical team. Obviously, the end with Notre Dame, they got a really good defense and they can play, and they're ranked in the top 15 to 20 for a reason. So I think USC could win, honestly, all of these games, but they have to go out there and execute. These are all going to be tight games. These are good football teams they're playing, and they just have to find ways in those clutch moments to execute better than they have.
No, I absolutely 100% agreement. I think the one thing that USC has lacked on offense, and we talked about it earlier, but the big thing for me, no explosive plays in the air. I mean, they're one of, I don't know how many teams are left on the list, but they don't have any, deep passing explosive types of plays over 42 yards or whatever that number was. And to me, that's the most shocking thing. So, yeah, I agree with you. They can win the rest of these games. Let me ask you this one question before we get out of here. Just have a little fun, throwaway question. You're USC's athletic director, Jen Cohn, and you want to help Coach Riley become a better head coach. He's still a young guy, still learning on the job. He's learning how to win close games. And you said, you know what, Coach, money's not an object, but you've got 2 choices. I need you to pick one of them. Now, I don't know if you're aware of this, but Pete Carroll is actually going to be teaching at USC next year. If you're Lincoln Riley, do you put Pete Carroll on your staff in an advisory role, kind of as a consigliere? Or do you say, you know what, Coach, I need you to be a full-time head coach and not an offensive play caller. Go hire the best offensive coordinator out there. If you're Lincoln Riley, which one do you choose?
I think, it's funny because I think there's a little bit of both that could happen there. I think Lincoln Riley could still call the plays. And I think what we forgot is he's got a very young offense, right? Miller Moss in his first year of starting, and the wide receivers, I think really it's a young group. And I thought they would be playing better by now more consistently. But when you look at it's such a talented group that what I actually think, I wonder, I know there's been a lot of NFL talk with Miller Moss, but I wonder if they could get him to stay for just one more year, right? And think about maybe get him to stay maybe one more year in the system. And he's obviously got a lot of years and experience in the system. But to me, it feels like between the offensive line and the receivers, maybe we could just get one more year of experience out of him and come in just executing a little bit better. Because that's the part to me that I'm a little surprised by, that we haven't seen at least 1 or 2 of these receivers really take off this year, right? When you think about their 2 leading receivers, Kyron Hudson and Jacoby Lane, have only 303 yards. I thought Zachariah Branch would be in for a lot better year. Deuce Robinson has a ton of potential, but he's only got 14 receptions this year, which I'm shocked by. I think there's this same young crew. I don't often say this because so often after a unsuccessful season, you go, well, we got to make changes and we got to find different things and different guys. I think this is a unit that could run it back and just get better naturally and have a better year next year. Because, again, it's the thing I keep pointing to with USC. They're not that far off. They have so much talent, but it's young. It's extremely young talent. And they had a lot of veteran talent last year with Caleb Williams and the receivers they had last year. They have so much young talent. And you can see D'Anton Lynn putting this defense together too. I wonder, obviously adding pieces in the portal is essential to any program now. That's just how it works nowadays, and they're going to add some pieces. But I think a lot of this same core could come back next year, including Miller Moss, and execute just a little bit better in big moments and could have a much better season.
Well, I'll tell you, if Miller Moss comes back, and I'm assuming he is, quarterback room is going to be pretty crowded because you've got Miller, you've got Jaden Mayaba, who everybody wants to see in the game right now just because of his athleticism. At least in certain packages, not necessarily say you're starting now. And then you've got Julian Lewis on schedule to be there for spring camp as well. And that's Lincoln Riley's new toy that he's looking to coach up. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. I know I saw you definitely avoid answering that question, but it's all right.
Honestly, I think, look, anytime, I'll say this, anytime you could bring on a coach of Pete Carroll's caliber to help, I don't think it's a problem. I don't think it would cause any sort of controversy at all. Look, if you bring him on and you get his advice, I don't think there's any issue to that. I see a team, though, that's not that far off. And I think they could run this back with the same core with maybe a few more portal pieces, especially like you mentioned on the defensive line, and they could have a lot of success next year. I don't think a whole lot needs to be changed. I think it comes down to this team more with execution and just getting another year better for a lot of these young guys.
Without a doubt. They do need to execute in the moment. And it would be nice if, again, we barely talked about it. You mentioned his name, Zachariah Branch, but that was supposed to be the dude this year to kind of make this team explode. And it just hasn't happened on special teams or wide receiver. And nobody can really quite put their finger on why, but he's definitely experiencing a sophomore slump. Hopefully he's got a few more games to kind of break out of that. We'll see what happens. Dalton, tell everybody again where they can find you every day.
Absolutely. As always, every day, myself and all of our great analysts at PFF.com. Check out all our written content. Check out the PFF Plus subscription to see all of the grades and data that we see on an everyday basis. You can get that too for less than $10 a month. And then as far as myself and Max Chadwick, Sunday mornings and Tuesday nights, we have our NCAA review and preview shows where we review and preview all the biggest games of the week. Sunday mornings, Tuesday nights, those are on YouTube on the PFF College Football Show all week for you guys to see.
Awesome. Everyone, go check that out when you're done making Locked On USC your first listen every day. All right, Dalton, thank you so much again for coming on. Hopefully we can do this again in the future. We'll see where USC ends up their season. For now, I think we got the professional help we needed. Everybody, look, you just had Dalton tell you, they're not that far away. They're not that far away. So as Lincoln Riley would say, just got to keep playing. All right, Dalton, thanks again. To everyone else, I'll be back with another episode of Locked On USC tomorrow. So until then, you know what to do.